What happens when two cultural titans walk onto the same stage with opposing worldviews? And what happens when that stage, designed for intimate revelation, becomes a pressure cooker for ideological war? Harpo Studios wasn't just preparing for a guest tonight, it was bracing for a rupture. The moment the guest list leaked, production energy shifted. Oprah Winfrey, the high priestess of American empathy, was set to sit across from Candace Owens, a firebrand conservative whose ethos is built on confronting mainstream narratives. Staff spoke in whispers, the control booth rehearsed camera sweeps like battle drills, and the applause sign was reprogrammed to pulse at softer intervals. Everything was engineered for tension management, and everyone could feel the undercurrent. This wasn't going to be a feel-good hour of television. Outside, protesters lined both sides of the street. Some held signs decrying Candace's rhetoric. Others supported her with equal fervor. Inside, the audience was curated for ideological diversity, a balance that rarely guarantees safety. Candace arrived through the front entrance, making eye contact with each security guard like she was walking into a negotiation, not a green room. Oprah, meanwhile, sat in silence as her stylist made final touch-ups. Her only words, "Let's keep it tight tonight." When the lights came up, Candace walked on stage not as a guest, but as a challenge. She didn't wave. She didn't perform. She locked eyes with Oprah, extended a firm handshake, and took her seat. The audience responded with tentative applause, not quite celebration, not quite concern. And as the opening camera panned to Oprah's composed smile, viewers at home couldn't know that what they were about to witness wasn't just a conversation. It was a cultural collision decades in the making. One that would soon unravel the boundaries of respect, legacy, and who really owns the American narrative. Candace Owens entered the studio like someone stepping into an arena, not a television set. Her heels clicked with intention, her posture was impeccable, and her expression was carved in quiet defiance. There was no smile for the cameras, no wave to the audience. She wasn't there to perform, she was there to confront. As the applause trickled in, more cautious than warm, she scanned the crowd once before turning her gaze to Oprah, who waited center stage with her trademark serene poise. Oprah stood and extended a hand. Candace met it without hesitation, firm, brief, unsentimental. The handshake alone sent a signal. This would not be a warm-hearted back and forth. This would be a negotiation between worldviews. As they sat, the camera framed them perfectly. Two icons of very different origins, beliefs, and cultural gravities. It felt less like a talk show and more like a summit. Tension hung in the air that everyone in the room could feel, but no one dared name. Oprah opened the segment with carefully chosen grace. "Candace Owens, thank you for joining us today." Her voice was smooth, inviting. Candace's reply was clipped but composed. "Thank you for having me." The exchange was civil, but it lacked warmth. Their eyes met not as host and guest, but as representatives of opposing realities. Oprah began with softball questions, childhood, career evolution, her rise in media. Candace answered them with clinical precision, never volunteering emotion. But then Oprah pivoted. "You've built a brand on challenging how people talk about race and identity. Why do you think your message sparks so much backlash?" The tone was still calm, but the edge was unmistakable. Candace didn't flinch. "Because I challenge the lie that being black in America is a handicap," she said. The crowd stiffened. A few murmurs broke out. Oprah kept her smile, but her eyebrows lifted slightly. She was no stranger to controversy, but this was a shot across the bow, and the show had only just begun. Oprah transitioned back into host mode with a polished smile. "You've become a voice for many," she said, "but also a source of tension. What do you think your critics are missing?" The question sounded soft, but everyone in the room knew better. It was the kind of Oprah question that disarmed and dissected at once. Candace leaned slightly forward. "They're missing that I'm not here for applause," she said. "I'm here for truth. And truth doesn't always come wrapped in affirmation." Her delivery was calm, even courteous, but there was a blade under the words. The audience sensed it shifting in their seats. Oprah, poised as ever, didn't blink. "I admire directness," Oprah replied, "but I also believe in honoring lived experience. When your truth collides with someone else's trauma, who gets to decide what's valid? That was the turn. Candace paused for half a beat, then spoke with precision. Truth and trauma aren't mutually exclusive, but we've built a culture that teaches people to treat hurt as identity. The audience tensed again. Candace wasn't easing into confrontation, she was walking straight into it, eyes open. Oprah nodded slowly, but her smile faded just a fraction. It was the first sign that control of the room was up for grabs. The first few questions were familiar territory. Oprah asked about Candace's family, her early career, and her decision to leave liberal politics behind. Candace answered each with her usual fluency, measured, poised, and unwavering. She described her values as shaped by accountability, not adversity. The audience listened politely, but the stillness wasn't comfort. It was anticipation. Everyone was waiting for the shift. It came like a soft turn on a sharp road. Oprah set down her cue card and looked directly at Candace. What do you say to the mother whose son was shot because he fit a description? The tone didn't change, but the ground did. The room felt suddenly smaller. The audience leaned in. Everyone understood. This wasn't the Oprah show anymore. This was a crucible. Candace held her gaze. I say I mourn with you, and then I say, let's raise boys who know they are more than what the world sees, who are taught to stand, not fear. She paused, letting the words settle. Grief is not permission to surrender. It's a reason to rise. There was no applause, just breathless quiet. Oprah took a long pause. Her face gave nothing away, but her silence spoke volumes. For the first time, the show felt like it was slipping from her hands and into Candace's. The moment Oprah brought up privilege, the studio seemed to tighten. Do you believe a child growing up in generational poverty has the same chance as one born into wealth? She asked. Her voice was calm, but the words were a trigger. The audience braced. This wasn't a softball, it was a lit match. Candace nodded slowly. No, of course they don't start at the same place. But what matters is that they start with the belief they can finish strong. Telling them they're doomed creates a ceiling before they've had a chance to climb. She spoke slowly, purposefully, as if weighing every syllable. There was no hesitation, just resolve. And while half the room nodded, the other half sat stone still, unsure whether to clap or recoil. Oprah raised an eyebrow. So, you don't believe systemic barriers shape outcomes? Candace met her gaze. They shape challenges, but not potential. I've seen too many people rise above to believe the system gets the final word. The tension was thick enough to slice. Oprah adjusted in her seat, scanning the audience before returning her gaze to Candace. And what do we say to those who haven't risen? Who feels stuck? Candace didn't blink. We say, you're not broken, you're not trapped, and you're not powerless. That last line landed like a bell toll. The audience didn't know whether to cheer or stay silent. Oprah's lips pressed into a thin smile. She'd brought up privilege. Candace had brought it back to power. And in doing so, she subtly repositioned the entire tone of the conversation, from what had been taken to what could still be claimed. Oprah tried to ground the conversation with emotional gravity. She leaned slightly forward, voice calm but pointed. Many people hear your words and feel invalidated. They think you're dismissing their pain, their lived experience. Do you understand how that lands? It was a familiar Oprah move. Reposition the conversation from facts to feelings. But Candace didn't blink. I understand that truth rarely comes without discomfort, she replied. And I understand that for decades, we've been more concerned with avoiding offense than fixing the problem. But I am not required to validate a worldview I believe is damaging. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't shift in her seat. Her posture, her words, her entire demeanor suggested one thing. I came ready. The audience didn't know how to react. The clapping was hesitant, scattered. Oprah's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in strategy. She wasn't used to being met with resistance that didn't come in the form of anger or defensiveness. Candace's calm was disarming, dangerous even, because she wasn't playing by the emotional cues that shaped so many of Oprah's most iconic interviews. Oprah changed tactics. So, if someone says the system is rigged against them, do you simply tell them to work harder? She asked. The question carried weight. Candace nodded, then answered. Number I tell them to be smarter, to understand that every system has cracks and those cracks can be used to rise, but only if you stop waiting for someone to apologize and start preparing to win. It was a soundbite made for virality. A woman in the front row gasped softly. Someone else muttered, "She's going too far." But others leaned in. You could feel it. Candace was no longer just a guest. She was holding the room. Oprah still sat in the host's chair, but the power had subtly shifted. And the more Candace spoke, the more the show began to look like something Oprah hadn't hosted in a very long time. A real, live confrontation with no clear path to resolution. What had started as a back and forth was now something heavier. The energy shifted again. Not with yelling or outbursts, but with the absence of sound. The kind of quiet that swells when people no longer know whether they're watching something brave or dangerous. The audience's initial chuckles and light reactions had vanished. Laughter had turned into fidgeting. Oprah noticed it. So did Candace. Oprah softened her tone again. "You're very strong in your stance," she said, folding her hands. "But do you worry that strength can come across as disregard? That people might hear your clarity and mistake it for cruelty?" It was a calculated nudge. Oprah was reaching for empathy, hoping Candace would meet her halfway. But Candace had no interest in midpoint diplomacy. "I've heard that before," Candace replied. "But strength isn't cruelty, it's clarity. And sometimes clarity feels like violence to those who've been sheltered from accountability." The audience shifted again. A man in the back row gave a single, cautious clap. A woman near the stage covered her mouth. On camera, it played as stillness, but in person, it felt like standing too close to a spark. Oprah sat back, a breath caught in her chest. "Some would say you're minimizing the trauma of others," she said. Candace didn't blink. "I'm refusing to let trauma be the centerpiece of identity. We can grieve and grow at the same time, but one of those keeps us moving and the other keeps us small." That sentence landed. Hard. Now the room was divided. Not ideologically, emotionally. Half the audience looked stunned, the other half captivated. And in that division, a strange kind of power shifted again. Not toward rage or sensationalism, but toward the rarest kind of television. The moment when something is said that can't be unsaid, and everyone realizes they were just there to witness it. Oprah inhaled deeply and shifted gears again. She leaned forward with the softest expression she had worn all night. "Let me ask you this," she began. "If the world never truly makes amends, if apologies never come, how do we help people feel seen?" Her voice was the velvet glove, hoping to draw the iron fist back into conversation. Candace didn't smile. "We help them feel powerful, not pitied," she replied. "The goal shouldn't be to feel seen. It should be to feel capable. You can't build strength through sympathy." Her tone didn't rise. It lowered, like someone dropping a weight onto the table between them. The crowd was still. Even the crew watching from monitors backstage stopped breathing. Oprah tried to respond with nuance. "Empathy is not pity," she said, folding her arms across her lap. "It's recognition. Of hardship. Of truth." Candace didn't wait. "Empathy without strategy is performance. And we've had a lot of performance over the past few decades. It's time to turn pain into plans." She wasn't out to soften. She was out to flip the script. That line cracked the air. Even those who disagreed couldn't deny the impact. Oprah blinked slowly. Her smile didn't return. The audience now watched not as passive viewers, but as jurors. No one shifted in their seat. They leaned forward. Oprah was trying to regain control by returning to emotional terrain. But Candace had planted her flag in another land. In strategy. In agency. This wasn't just pushback. This was ideological disruption, unfolding in real time. Oprah was still Oprah, but the gravity in the room had moved to Candace. The challenge was no longer spoken, it was structural. And no commercial break could undo what was happening in that studio. Candace sat back in her chair unshaken, her voice lowered to something deliberate and firm. "We've created an entire economy around one word," she said. Victimhood. The moment the word left her mouth, you could feel the breath in the room catch. Not a gasp, something tighter, like a collective holding of air. Victimhood has become currency, she continued. We reward people for carrying pain, not for moving beyond it. We give awards for suffering and side-eye to strength. That's not empowerment. It's glorified paralysis. Her words dropped like stones. The weight of them clattered across every corner of the studio. Some faces hardened, others softened in surprise. Oprah leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting that people who suffer injustice should be silent? The question was quiet, but there was steel in it. Candace didn't blink. Number, I'm saying they should speak, but then they should build. Speaking is not the end of healing, it's the beginning of action. The audience was frozen. Even the occasional coughs had stopped. This wasn't just a heated interview anymore, it was an ideological surgery. Candace wasn't cutting with rage. She was cutting with restraint. That made it sharper. Oprah nodded slowly, lips pressed tight. She didn't respond, because in that moment she couldn't, not without changing the conversation entirely. Candace had just dropped a challenge not just to Oprah, but to every institution, every media platform, and every movement that profits off perpetual pain. The word had been spoken. Victimhood. And no one on that stage, not even Oprah, could unspeak it. As soon as the word victimhood settled over the audience, the studio's energy shifted from tense to brittle. Producers in the control room exchanged rapid glances. A stage manager stepped closer to the edge of the curtain. Even Oprah's assistant, usually a silent presence backstage, leaned in toward the monitor with furrowed brows. Something irreversible had just happened. Oprah crossed her legs slowly, buying herself a moment. There's a difference between naming pain and being consumed by it, she said carefully. Her voice had the same warmth it always did, but now there was a tremor beneath it, not of fear, of calculation. She was trying to pull the reins back in. Candace didn't blink. But that difference gets lost when every conversation begins and ends with suffering. You can't build a future if every sentence starts with what broke you. There were no claps, no gasps, just silence, and a few raised phones. The audience knew this was no longer a talk show. It was something heavier. In the wings, a production assistant whispered into a headset, "Do we cut early?" Another responded, "We'd be cutting away from the moment everyone's going to be talking about tomorrow." And that was the truth. No one could look away. On stage, Oprah let out a measured breath. "So what do we do with the pain?" she asked. Candace's answer came fast, unsparing. "We stop worshiping it." The audience was visibly shaken. A few looked down. Others stared at the stage with wide, unreadable eyes. No one clapped, no one dared, because no matter where they stood on the issue, they recognized what they were witnessing. A direct, surgical dissection of the language that had shaped Oprah's platform for decades. And in that moment, as the show's brand of safe revelation turned into something unpredictable and raw, producers realized this segment couldn't be edited out. It was too late. The shift had happened, and every camera in the room had captured it. Backstage, the silence was louder than the show. A cluster of producers stood around a monitor watching the live feed as if it were a countdown. One whispered, "She's not just disagreeing, she's dismantling." Another replied, "And she's doing it without raising her voice." The sense of loss wasn't about control, it was about narrative. A format they had shaped for decades was being rewritten in real time. A junior assistant reached for a phone, instinctively preparing for PR damage control. Another ran to check the show's delay buffer, just in case someone ordered a hard cut. No one had. Not yet. The tension wasn't about censorship, it was about consequence. The kind of moment you don't realize is historic until it's too late to shape. Meanwhile, the studio audience remained transfixed. The energy in the room was no longer tense, it was reverent. People weren't watching a debate, they were watching a reckoning. One production lead murmured into her headset, "Oprah hasn't lost composure, but she's lost narrative dominance. This is something else now." Candace, still seated under the studio lights, maintained her composure. Her hands rested lightly on her lap, and she hadn't shifted her posture once. It was a message in stillness. Not stubbornness, presence. She didn't gloat. She didn't perform. She simply remained. And in doing so, she filled the room with an unspoken declaration. You invited me here. Now I'm saying the part no one wanted aired. There were no tech resets, no calls to break. The studio remained live, and in that silence, as the machinery of the Oprah brand strained to maintain control, one reality became painfully clear to everyone behind the curtain. This wasn't a segment. It was a rupture, and it was being broadcast in high definition. As tension thickened in the studio, Oprah did what she always does when things approach a boil. She signaled discreetly for a commercial break. It was subtle, barely a tilt of her head, but the director caught it. The crew jumped into motion, scrambling to cue the network, but they weren't fast enough. Candace kept going, her voice steady, relentless. There's a difference between processing pain and selling it, she said, her gaze unwavering. Entire institutions now exist to monetize outrage. They profit off grievance and package it as identity. The audience went silent again. Not bored, just afraid to react. Because everyone in that room could feel it. This wasn't just a segment going off script. It was the ground shifting beneath a cultural empire. Oprah opened her mouth, maybe to pivot, maybe to retaliate. But she didn't speak. She just looked at Candace. Her eyes weren't angry, they were calculating. And for a brief, telling moment, the host who had always controlled the room seemed unsure of what came next. When the commercial finally cut in, the image of the two women locked in a silent stare was the last thing viewers saw. Backstage, chaos. Producers flooded Oprah's dressing room. Assistants tried to reach network execs. Camera operators replayed clips on their phones. No one spoke above a whisper. And on stage, Candace remained seated, legs crossed, unfazed, as though she hadn't just detonated a primetime grenade. When the cameras resumed, the applause light blinked, but only a few claps trickled in. The audience wasn't ready to cheer. They were still trying to understand what had just happened. Oprah offered a line about spirited discourse with a smile that didn't quite land. Candace returned a neutral nod. It was clear. Whatever came next, this wasn't Oprah's room anymore. She still sat in the spotlight, but control had changed hands, quietly, unmistakably, and on live television. What followed wouldn't just shake the talk show world, it would redefine who gets to hold the mic in America's most sacred conversations. When the show returned from commercial, the tension hadn't subsided. It had calcified. Oprah tried to ease back into control, offering a softer question about community empowerment, but Candace didn't follow the cue. Instead, she pivoted, not with hostility, but with clarity. "Oprah, may I ask you something?" she said, folding her hands calmly. Oprah gave a polite nod, but her guard was up. "You've built your legacy on helping people process their trauma, and that's important," Candace said. "But at what point does revisiting pain become a business model? When does it stop being healing and start becoming indulgence?" You could hear a pin drop. Oprah blinked, slowly. She had been asked plenty of tough questions before. But never like this. Never live. Never from a guest who turned the interview into an inquisition. Oprah took a long pause. Then, carefully, "I think it becomes indulgence only when the person sharing no longer seeks resolution." It was a graceful deflection, but the audience heard the shift. Candace pressed again, gently. "But when the platform rewards suffering more than solutions, what does that create? Who benefits?" The question wasn't rhetorical. It was rhetorical warfare. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or brace for fallout. Oprah didn't flinch, but she no longer controlled the rhythm of the segment. Candace had seized it, and she wasn't letting go. Candace took a breath, then delivered a sentence that sent shockwaves through the room. "You talk about dismantling systems," she said, eyes steady, voice low. "But what if you're part of the system now? What if the very empire built to spotlight pain now depends on perpetuating it?" Oprah visibly stiffened. Her legendary composure held, but only just. The crowd was rattled. Oprah replied with cool poise. "Systems evolve, and so do the people within them." It was meant to be measured, but it sounded like a counterpunch. Candace didn't blink. True, but power resists change, even when it wears the face of progress. If your name builds the stage, you own what gets said on it, and what doesn't. The words were scalpel sharp. It wasn't an attack, it was an indictment. This wasn't just a guest pushing back. It was a full confrontation with legacy. Oprah sat silently for several seconds, not in retreat, but in recognition that the foundation of her show had been fundamentally challenged, not by protest or scandal, but by the sheer audacity of a guest who refused to yield. What had started as an interview was now a reckoning. The crowd was restless, not because they were bored, but because they knew they were witnessing something historic. Murmurs ran through the audience like static. One man covered his mouth with his hand. A woman turned to her friend, whispering, "Did she just say that?" Even seasoned camera operators held their breath. Oprah leaned forward, her expression tightening. For the first time that night, a flicker of frustration broke through the composure. "Be careful, Candace," she said quietly. "There's a difference between truth and provocation." It wasn't a threat, but it was a warning, one the audience felt in their bones. Candace didn't hesitate. And there's a difference between legacy and monopoly. A difference between protecting your platform and protecting your perspective. The tension in the room became almost physical. It sat on everyone's chest. This was no longer a taping. It was theater. And not even Oprah could predict the next scene. Candace had just crossed a threshold few ever dared. And Oprah, for once, wasn't sure how to close the door behind her. Backstage, the chaos was now coordinated. Stage managers whispered. Producers glanced toward the wings. 2 security guards moved slowly into place, not to intervene, just to be visible. It was subtle but unmistakable. Everyone saw it, and everyone knew what it meant. Control was slipping. The audience shifted. Phones came out. A few gasps rang out. The director spoke into his voice strained. "Stay on a wide shot. Do not cut." Oprah noticed the movement and offered a calm but pointed look toward the wings. Then she turned back to Candace. "It's been a passionate conversation," she said carefully, trying to land the plane. Candace stood slowly. No dramatics, just calm defiance. "I think I've said enough for today." She nodded toward Oprah. "Thank you for the seat." Then she turned to the audience. "And thank you for listening, even if it was uncomfortable." No one stopped her. No one could. As she walked off stage, the cameras didn't follow. They stayed locked on Oprah, whose silence said more than any monologue ever could. Candace walked backstage with the calm of someone who knew exactly what she'd done. Her assistant trailed a few steps behind, fielding rapid-fire texts from media outlets already requesting comment. But Candace didn't break stride. She didn't look rattled. She looked resolved. Back inside the studio, Oprah remained in her chair, unmoving. The applause light blinked twice. A few half-hearted claps followed, more out of obligation than enthusiasm. One producer spoke quietly into her headset. She didn't storm out. She walked out. That's going to matter. And it did. Within minutes, footage of the walk-off hit social media, split-screen edits, out-of-context quotes, reaction videos. The algorithm fed the moment to millions. Half the internet cheered. The other half seethed. But no one looked away. Candace Owens had walked into Oprah's house, challenged the foundation, and left without flinching. She didn't wait to be dismissed. She decided when the conversation was over. The fallout came faster than any team could spin it. News outlets ran headlines like wildfire. Owens walks off Oprah. Candace versus Queen O. Talk show history made in silence. Clips trended. Panels assembled. Everyone had an opinion, but no one had control. Oprah's team issued a carefully worded statement. "We remain committed to dialogue, even when it's uncomfortable." Candace didn't issue one. She didn't have to. Her silence became its own form of punctuation. A punctuation mark shaped like a mic drop. Behind the scenes, talk show hosts, media executives, and celebrity publicists held emergency calls. The format of daytime discourse had just changed, possibly forever. And so the question remains, was Candace Owens justified in confronting one of the most powerful figures in media? Or did she weaponize the moment to seize attention? One thing is certain, you can't unsee what happened on that stage. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and stay tuned because in this new era of unscripted truth, the most powerful moment is the one nobody saw coming.